Hello and welcome to Sound and Image Lab, the Dolby Institute podcast. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today we're going to talk about No Time to Die, and that is the final outing of Daniel Craig as 007. We have on the show today Oscar-winning re-recording mixers Paul Massey and Mark Taylor, and we also have supervising sound editor Oliver Tarney. Paul is no stranger to this show. He's been on before discussing both Bohemian Rhapsody, for which he won the Academy Award, as well as Ford versus Ferrari. And Oliver Tarney was on the show most recently as part of our Oscars coverage this past year to talk about news of the world. So if you haven't seen the latest installment of the franchise, directed by Bond newcomer Cary Joji Fukunaga, let me tell you, this movie is a crazy ride. It is big, it is loud, it's got some crazy, awesome action sequences in it, but it also has some surprisingly tender and even very funny moments. It is a lot of fun. It's a great movie. But what was it like to work on the sound? Let's find out. Paul, Oliver, Mark, thanks so much for taking the time today to talk to us about No Time to Die. It's Bond 25. It's Daniel Craig's final go-round as the James Bond character. I'm kind of curious for each of you, how did you get involved with the film, and what was it like to kind of come into this storied franchise for Bond 25 and Daniel Craig's final turn with the character?
Well, it was obviously a huge honor, to be honest. Growing up in England, just as Mark and Oliver have as well, it's sort of carrying the Union Jack franchise, and it's obviously something that everyone I think who works in sound would love to work on a Bond at some point in their career. So it was a huge honor, and I managed to get on board because of Michael Solinger and Oliver and Mark, and all of us being hired as a team, and it was a great honor also to find out that it was going to be Daniel's last film. I didn't know that going in, so it was great.
Mark and I had worked on the first two of the Daniel Craig movies. Mark was the effects mixer on both, but I was one of the effects editors under Eddie Joseph, was the supervisor on the first two. So, I think maybe for us, there's a nice symmetry to working on the first two and then just to bookend it with the last one. And for me to be an effects editor at the beginning of that arc of the Daniel Craig thing and then finish it off. And James Harrison also was on those two, and he was my co-supervisor on it as well. So there's a really nice symmetry to all that. And I even spoke to Eddie Joseph the other day just to catch up with him and, say that we'd all been reminiscing, and what a nice project Casino Royale was. So it was a really nice way to finish that, the Daniel Craig era.
And I did the same job for all three. So I guess I've moved on a bit, but maybe not as far as Oliver and James.
So I want to ask you, one of the things I noticed about the film, the Bond films typically start with a huge sort of action set piece that precedes the main titles, but this one starts very differently. It's almost a very kind of intimate sequence in Norway with Madeleine Swan as a child, and then the first reveal of the villain, and then that brilliant sequence on the ice pond and then falling through the ice. Can you talk a little bit about the approach to setting the tone for No Time to Die and that specific work that went into that first sequence and kind of what it was like to sort of play against the type of starting with a huge bombastic action sequence in the film?
Yeah, I think it was the first section that we got to work on. We started midway through filming just because the back end was going to be really tight. So whilst they were filming, we were given that as just a standalone section to work on. It was quite surprising to see how they were going to start the film on a first viewing. But it's, Cary definitely, wants to do things differently, to have something fresh. And that certainly felt fresh. That opening shot you think is Bond, on the top shot you just assume it's going to be, and then it's not. And there's a couple of misdirections there, that being one. And then what he does on the ice pond as well. You're expecting something different. But it's really beautifully structured. And even when he was filming, he was giving feedback to Tom and Elliot, the editors, about very specific sounds that he wanted. So as we got the section, it was pay attention to the sound of the crampons, make them really creepy as he's walking through. The slow sliding door, this very slow sliding door. Everything was given its space. And so there was this very sort of deliberate feel about everything. And then you just suddenly get these bursts of violence, which sort of hit you even more because you've had this sort of space either side. And so, yeah, it was you knew where you were going into something different. It was a great first scene for us to work on, because you sort of have to recalibrate and you go, oh, it's not an all-out action film. This is going to be a different type of film. So it was a really good one to work on first.
And so obviously the movie then really kicks into high gear when we go to Italy, and there's the sequence where Bond visits Vesper's grave and the explosion. And then just an extraordinary, I love that chase sequence on the bridge. And obviously after the explosion, you get the concussive sound effect and Bond losing his hearing. So he doesn't actually hear the car that's coming up behind him. He just, feels the gunshot go past him. So that to me is like, that's when now I'm in the Bond world when that sequence happens. So can you guys talk a little bit about constructing that sequence and the idea of the concussion affecting Bond's hearing, and then how that sequence on the bridge came together?
Oh, you, Ollie?
I guess, again, it was something Cary was keen on doing. I guess it was that thing of, and this is partly elemental and partly mix, was how detached do we go from the world? Are we literally going to play it as no sound, or so we ended up with a sort of muted sound. So you kind of felt what he was feeling. You felt his sort of body resonating through that rather than things that he would hear acoustically. So then obviously Paul was using the music then to drive that through solely until we got onto the bridge. But that was Cary saying, it was one of those things like, do you really want to go this low? It's like further. It's like, okay, fine. And so you really want to be that strong an idea all the way through to the bridge. So, he's really brave and good like that and trying things out. And, it works. It just takes a little time to put together. But, it was a really good sequence. And it's a nice snap out. It really is quite a shocking, with the car right behind him. And then it's a very violent sort of sound as the car skids over the stone. And then we're full tilt into action then, yeah.
And we did find also that with that treatment on the his breathing and vocals and gasps and all of the sound effects, that even the music was going to come in a little bit too bright there, even with the low bass lines. So that got filtered back a little bit as well, just to try and match the overall tone of him running towards the bridge. It was a really brave idea. It works really well.
And it's nice not just to have the 8K tone to simulate deafness. It was nice to have it be in him, in his POV, his oral POV of that situation.
Talk to me about the recording of the getting the car sounds on the cobblestones in that little Italian village. I presume you can't just go down to a little Italian village and do field recordings of an extraordinarily expensive car ripping around this historic city. How did you go about constructing all that material?
On production, they did exactly that. They ripped around a historic Italian city for quite a few days in some DB5s. But no, we hired a car proving ground here for 2 days. And so they've got straight tarmac track that you can go and record on, but also every kind of dirt track or grass or curbs or cobble or water, everything. So we didn't run the DB5 through water, but we were to very specific instructions what we could and couldn't do with that car. But pretty much you could get, we had the 3 Aston Martins, the motorbike, and the Land Rover and the Toyota, and we were allowed to, have 2 days of just with the proper stunt drivers doing every surface and every car, and it was fantastic. It was great. It was one of those ones where, you wonder, is it you're getting paid to go and spend 2 days messing around with classic cars, and it was great fun. Yeah, fantastic.
Did you have the actual DB5 with you?
It was the wrong color. It was red, but Mark managed to EQ the red out of it, and so it did sound silver.
Okay, good.
Thank you. I did, yeah.
That's great. I wanted to ask you, one of my favorite moments in that whole Italy sequence is we're in the car with Bond and Madeline in the square, and he's getting shot at, and it's just bullet after bullet after bullet hitting the bulletproof glass on the car. And it's the sound treatment inside the car is so remarkable as those bullets are hitting. And I'm just curious about how you guys built and constructed that sequence, because it's so tense, and it's so wonderful that, of course, Daniel Craig is just being there cool as a cucumber. He knows his windshield is not going to give out on him.
Well, I don't think it's just that as well. I think he's processing, what's just happened emotionally. He thinks he's been betrayed. So I think he's. I don't think it's just confidence in the car. I think it's a little bit more than that. But again, it was a Cary note to have it. He really is aware of the environment mix wise, and was very clear that he wanted that assault to feel like a 360 kind of assault, rather than being sort of front heavy with a little bit of surrounds. It was like, I want it to feel, the pressure, the SPL kind of coming from everywhere. So you did feel you were in this thing, just literally, immersed in bullets coming at you. And we had to build up a huge library of, because there were so many of them and they're all coming out of all the speakers. We had to have a huge palette of sounds for the impacts and different ones as it sort of ricochets off, or it's more of a direct hit, like a thunk or a skid. And then at the very end, just as it starts to give, and you just get those little crystals kind of starting to fall, which snaps him out and goes, okay, fine. Finally, the car is going to give way. I do have to do something. But it was a great sequence. It was tricky, if you, and I remember, I think we switched formats quite a few times when we were mixing that one to make sure that in Atmos or 7.1 or 5.1, it felt comparable. Because obviously each format, there are slight variations in how surrounds feel, and so I remember, I think, flicking between the various formats and making sure that it was going to feel right between whichever format you saw, that it was going to stay true.
Obviously, the enhanced low end in surrounds using Atmos were really put to use at that point in that scene. But yeah, as Oliver says, when we flipped to 5.1, 7.1, had to make sure it worked too. That's one of my favorite sequences, just the fact that not only is he processing what just happened and what's going on, but also the fact that that glass, just sonically, that glass is starting to give way. And maybe there's only another dozen gunshots and they're going to be dead. It's a great sequence.
And the way it ends as well, you just, it's all super, super serious. And then suddenly, the headlights pop up. The guns come out, the music kicks in, and it's just pure Bond, and fantastic. Yeah.
And Cary was very instructive in making sure that the trombone figure there from Hans was very dominant in the music. As soon as he starts being aggressive again, and the car starts spinning, and he's starting to fire at the guys outside, he really wanted that trombone figure to just drive it, which was, again, a bold choice, because there's plenty of other instruments that were driving it as well.
And too many guns.
You mentioned Dolby Atmos. Were you guys mixing and building natively in Atmos from the beginning? And was that sort of, I presume that this was, I did get to see it in Atmos, and this was definitely sort of a signature sequence from a sound perspective with Atmos. But was this, was that part of the concept for the sound design of the film from the beginning?
Yeah, we always, when it's an Atmos film, we always work in native Atmos as our main mix environment, and just pay consideration to 7.1, 5.1, make sure that we're not going to lose anything downstream as we have to start making those masters. But I think that's a pretty common practice now that everyone's mixing natively in Atmos. If the film is going to release that way.
And it's so quick to switch to, say, a 7.1 re-render or a 5.1 re-render to see how it's going to translate, rather than having to print something and then, just kind of, it's just a flick of a button and you can see where you're going, which is handy.
I don't see how anyone can mix the other way around, to be honest, and I never have right from the beginning. How you would upmix to an Atmos just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But if you're going to do an Atmos release, you got to start in Atmos.
I could not agree with you more. You brought up the Hans Zimmer score, which is just fantastic. Paul, I'd love to hear kind of, what was the experience working with Hans? Was he part of the conversations with you guys during the mix, or at what point did the music show up? Did you guys have it during the pre-dubs? Kind of how did that whole process with working with the music, and did you have a lot of separation for Atmos with the music tracks? And just talk to us about how all that came together.
Yeah, I mean, I had Hans is great at providing separation, and I had multiple stems for the guitars and strings and brass and perc and choir and everything. I believe they were, I don't remember now, I think there were 5.1 or 7.1 stems for each section. And then I made the Atmos decisions from there in the final mix, which is, I prefer to do it that way than have that decision made early on prior to us having all of the sound effects and everything else in the monitors. Hans, we didn't have very long to mix this. We only had 3 weeks as a final. So Hans was also up against it. And during the pre-dubbing time, he came in with a lot of his people, and we went through score, cue by cue by cue, spent a couple of evenings going through everything, making sure it's relating, sounding good on the stage. Where does it differ from the guide tracks and the demos, and how is it going to get, progress from that point forward? So there was a lot of interaction actually early on, which is great, because a lot of times I don't get that at all. Maybe a couple of phone calls, but never actually sitting on the stage going through stems with him.
And we had some demos. I mean, they're really good at that. There was demos which, and the Hans team, the demos that they produce are just spectacular. And so it's a really useful thing for us on the sound design side. You're very aware of in that section which frequencies they're going to inhabit, and how full they're going to be in those frequencies. So we can certainly, in terms of sound design elements, or for Mark doing the effects mix, we would always be flicking in and out with the music so that we kind of know, all right, are we going to be fighting in this frequency or not? So it was really informative, as always, to get music early like that. And they were, really, really good demos. They're very close. They're like, 10% off the finished thing. It's ridiculous how good they can get them. So it's a really useful thing to have while you're track laying or pre-mixing.
More and more I'm finding with music and mixing native Atmos, I'm tending not to use too many objects, to be honest. I'd rather do the spread in a 7.1 environment so that it sits well there and for all future down mixes. Obviously, there are some objects that are going to be going on, but I tend to bring things out into the room a little more and treat the room as a diagonal, treat imaging as diagonal and behind us and front to back and all of the rest with the principal 7.1 bed before I turn straight to objects. But obviously in this film, there were a lot of places where we could use objects.
That makes sense. Tell me a little bit about the mix. Paul, you mentioned that you had 3 weeks to mix. I presume that you guys were up against a very hard release date. And then, of course, it got pushed by a year and a half because of COVID. So I know you started the pre-mix. You guys are on the stage today at Twickenham working on different films. And I know you did some of your pre-mixing there, and then you finished at Goldcrest. But can you tell us about how the mix went, and why the multiple facilities and multiple stages and whatnot? And then I'm curious, did you guys, because there was this year and a half that happened while the film was sitting on the shelf waiting to get released during COVID, did you end up going back into it, or are we hearing that original 3-week mix when we go to the theater today?
I think it's the original mix, right?
It was 18 months of QC checks. We were really, really, really thorough. And we asked the producers to slip the release date so that we could make sure there was you won't hear any dropouts and nothing digital in there. Nasty. It's all. There was, I think, two VFX shots that were updated because they had a little bit more time. Other than that, absolutely, it's the film that was finished at the end of March.
Right. In fact, right at the end of the mix, I dashed back to LA and did the Imax mix in the next 3 days because it just, it was up against that deadline, had to be finished. And then, of course, everything just came to a grinding halt. And
We literally the near fields as they finished, it was like 2 days later. Then it was lockdown. That was it. It was a pretty weird time. Yeah.
Oh, that was actually mid near field M&E when we got the call to stop.
Extraordinary. Well, I mean, that's better than being in the middle of the final mix when they decide to pull the plug, right? That would have been a tricky circumstance for sure.
Yeah, I got it under the wire.
That's true. We did actually get finished, and that finished product is pretty much what came out. Yeah. Even though it pushed a year and a half, we didn't get a chance to go back in and tweak anything.
I'm surprised. I feel like directors are always wanting to go back in and open things up, especially if they have any time to kind of sit and relax and take a fresh look at the film. But I mean, obviously, the mix speaks for itself. It's I don't know what I would do to change it. It's a fantastic mix as it is.
Also, I think there's some, different directors are different, and I wouldn't want to speak for Cary, or different processes there's plus points and negatives to everything, but sometimes on a really focused, tight schedule on a big film, there's a certain energy about that, and if you had more time or more, you could explore more. It can become over polished, and there's something a little bit sterile can creep in sometimes. I've been on movies that feel like that a little bit. So there is an energy with everyone just going full tilt trying to get something done, and there might be a few little rough edges, but as part of it, it doesn't feel overproduced, and I think maybe there would be that danger if you opened it up again and just said we've got all this time. You start maybe just making it a little bit too sanitized or something. I think it's got a really good energy about it, the film, and I'm glad it finished when it did. I think it's good.
Yeah, it would have been hard to get back into it, that's for sure. So, Paul, I wanted to ask you, it's always one of the most satisfying moments of the recent Bond films has always been, and as an audience member, you're kind of waiting for that Bond theme to kick in. And you never know exactly quite when it's going to happen, but it's coming. And it's always incredibly satisfying when it does. So this is your first time mixing a Bond film. What was it like for you to kind of, that first time when you got first of all, where in the movie does the Bond theme come for the first time? And what was it like for you as the guy mixing the music to put that in?
Well, I do remember that moment exactly. And I didn't actually see it coming upon myself, because I knew the theme was coming up and I'd heard it with Hans already. But once I actually had it under my hands on faders under my hands, it was kind of a tingly moment, I gotta say. I probably played it too loud. Sorry, Mark. And Ollie.
It's all right. I'm used to it.
But no, it was tremendous to hear that and the power. I mean, even at the beginning, in the opening, the opening credits when he's looking down the gun barrel and firing, and it kicks in with the classic brass phrases, spine tingling. It was great. You get used to it after a while, obviously, but that first kind of faders up run through the reel felt great, felt fabulous. It's like, okay, here we go. It's kicking in.
I want to talk about the sequence in Cuba and the party with the Spectre agents and our first introduction to Paloma, the character that Ana de Armas plays. I love this sequence. It was just so much fun. It's such a blast. And specifically, I was really curious about I love the way you guys treated the dialogue and the in-ear pieces as they're communicating with each other, and how that differentiates from a very busy party situation. Can you talk a little bit about putting that sequence together and how you guys arrived at that kind of way to differentiate those dialogue treatments?
Well,
this is probably the toughest. I mean, I know it seems to get it to sit like that. It was a pretty tough sequence to put together, both elementally and mix wise. Yeah.
I mean, I think we spent an awfully long time on that sequence because there was a lot of experimentation in initial ideas of how much to futz the dialogue, get through an earpiece, how much to hear. For instance, when Bond and Paloma were talking to each other, do you actually want to hear their real acoustic voice as well as their in-ear response and such? And we tried a few where we didn't hear any of the actual acoustic. We only heard the futz, and that was a little bit unnerving. And we ended up obviously doing a blend of the two. And then the futz treatment itself, because there was a lot of music going on in there. There's a lot of sound effects, a lot of crowd, partying. So we had to make the dialogue somewhat clear every time we leant towards too much fuzz, it was never legible. And Cary wanted, very, very bold music going on as source within the club, which was great.
Because you want to keep the energy up the whole time, yeah.
Like the first part where they walk into a side room, there was the illusion of a PA playing in there with some club music playing, and then they go out into the main dance hall, and there's a live band playing. There's crowd and a lot of
and the little bits of Blofeld that you do. I remember sitting in a cutting room with Cary whilst he was choosing which bits of the little Blofeld dialogue things would poke through, and shifting those all around and trying different options. And again, so that had to have a different type of futz again, but you would hear that a little bit. So it was quite a tapestry of sound to kind of just get right. And in the end, it sounds like it should do. It's one of those ones where, like, with any of these things, you sort of, when you get to there, you go, why didn't we just do this in the first place? But it was a little bit of a journey to get to there. But I think, it's a great sequence.
Yeah, it is. It's exciting and unusual. I tried to use height for Blofelds to try and, differentiate between Bond and Paloma's futzing in the earpiece. That was tricky because there were essentially two radios on top of each other. As I said, it took a long time to get through that sequence.
We auditioned a lot of streamers, didn't we? Yeah.
And then, if the copy changed or if the sync of it changed, and then it's a sort of a rebuild again. Even if you just move a line 4 seconds, then what Mark was having to do to fill in the gaps now had to be reconstructed to keep the excitement up in areas where there was now no dialogue, and et cetera, as you can imagine. It was an exciting sequence, though.
Yeah, Mark, how did you poke through that with all that cacophony mess with any of your sound effects? My goodness.
Well, initially I was quite pokey, and it was just like this, this debauched Cuban party going on. So we had to just carve gaps around the dialogue, and it was almost like little waves of, when you went into a different space, you would hear certain bits of the room, but then we'd get a way down for the dialogue to poke through. Same with the source music and what have you. It was like we'd be in their world for a minute and then back to the world to describe what we were seeing. So it wasn't the end of the world. It was definitely more tricky for Paul's side than mine.
I'm curious about tone, and I want to ask you this, and this may be a complete red herring question, but I feel like there are certainly a lot of moments in this film that are lighter in tone and more comedic than some of the more recent Bond films. But it strikes a balance. There's that first sequence in Italy is so menacing and kind of terrifying, but the Cuban party sequence and that action sequence is kind of fun. It's a good rock'em sock'em kind of classic Bond kind of shootout punches and crazy action. And from a sound design and mix perspective, do you approach those kinds of scenes differently in terms of if it's sort of more fun kind of comedic action sequence versus kind of the Italy stuff, which was a bit heavier? How do you approach that from a design and mix perspective, knowing that emotionally those scenes are going to sit with the audience in a different way? Yeah,
just the picture obviously is informing you in a big way of how to approach it. But yeah, that's one of the things I like about the film in general. If when you see the team going into the biolab early on, it's incredibly accurate, disciplined. The glass just whomps, it doesn't break. Everything's very deliberate, very short little sharp shooting things going on, and little percussive explosions that go off. And then you have chaotic scenes, like Italy ends up being quite chaotic and Cuba does. And so that was one of the things about the way that Cary had made it. There's always variation in each sequence. It wasn't that thing of you did one sequence and you felt, right, that's our into how we design this film. That one's, they've bought into that. That's it. We'll just extrapolate that over the film now. Each one had to be looked at as its own case for sound design. And the Cuba one, I think Ana Damas brought a lot of levity to that. She was just fantastic in it. And I think if you're going to have a long film, and the film did have to be long, there's a lot there's a whole arc there, a 5-film arc that they were kind of wrapping up. So there's a lot to get in, but I still think that earned its place, very well. If you're going to have a long film, I think you can still take a little bit of time to go and have something fun and just reset a little bit in that way. And so that it doesn't feel it's just too serious all the time or too fun all the time. It was a great dynamic to have shifts like that in the film.
And I think in terms of approach from a mixed standpoint, I've never really analyzed this, but I guess you go a little bit more when it's more of a comedic chase sequence like that. Possibly you go a little bit more toward the music, in terms of just keeping it a little bit light. Whereas if it's very, very serious and there's a chase and a huge threat to life or something, then you're going to be leaning into the effects a little bit more, and maybe the way you build the gunshots and the sounds of the cars and such would differ somewhat from a comedic scene.
It's leaving holes afterwards as well. If there's little lines that just you want to land, just leave a hole afterwards, and just let that, wash over the audience and come back in again, rather than if it's a full-on action scene, which is a lot more serious and you just want to keep the energy up the whole way. So,
right.
Dynamics.
I think these scenes naturally inform us how to design and mix them, to be honest, to a large extent. You know that when they're going across that zip line, it's not really a threat to anyone, even though it looks like it if you took it out of context. It's going to end up with a sort of woo 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 woo. That's what's going to happen in the scene. Right?
But you don't have to wait very long for the menace and the dark tone to come back. I think shortly after that, we find ourselves on the on the boat that explodes, and we have our final moment with one of our beloved characters from the last few films. Can you talk about putting that sequence together on the boat? And it was such an emotional sequence, and yet, were the production tracks usable? Was that all ADR? How did that sequence come together?
It was Simon Hayes did the production recordings, and he's spectacularly good. And there's very little ADR in the film, even though there was a lot of Imax, and we did some tests, and they're pretty noisy, those Imax cameras, but he did an incredible job. And so I think, if I recall correctly, there's a few lines that we had to ADR, maybe, where it went very, very quiet. But I think most of it was kind of production, wasn't it?
I seem to remember most of that being production. It was obviously noisy, but again, Simon did a great job, so it was legible. And
we're going to add in water anyway, so it didn't have to be pristine.
So once you add it in, Mark did a great job of just making that ship threatening and sound like it was creaking and sinking, and the water rushing in and all the rest. And so ultimately, you can make that dialogue work. If the dialogue's legible above the noise floor and you're going to have a noisy scene like that, it's probably going to work as production if that's what everyone likes, performance-wise.
It's tough though with the bit in when you're designing. A lot of the energy and the sound of water is in that kind of dialogue range, and it's pretty hard if you do just low end and just very toppy, you kind of don't feel that violence of the water. So it was pretty tough to again get the balance of not getting in the way of their dialogue, but still feeling like the water is progressing and is an increasing threat.
And all the groans from the boat sinking as well, I seem to remember.
Yeah,
spending quite a bit of time placing those around the room and also around the dialogue to sell the idea that they're in a sinking ship. I
do remember at one point Cary saying that those engine rooms are incredibly noisy, and I was kind of grateful that he was saying that, because it was going to be noisy no matter what. There's no way we're going to go inside someone's head during that sequence.
Yeah, fair enough. I also presume that was a particular sequence where you must have leaned pretty heavily on Atmos to kind of put the creaks in the water and all the to carve out a little bit of space in that front channel for the dialogue to come through as well.
There was a lot of time spent on those creaks, right, Mark?
There was, and there was a lot of time you making sure that I did that so that you could hear the dialogue. It was very intimate, the dialogue in that scene. So it was, but I think it turned out nicely.
Yeah, definitely. I'm getting the sense that Paul, you and Mark have a very delicate dance to do on this film, to because all these elements are hitting at once. Right?
I'm terrified of him.
No, I think collectively as a team, we all try to find those, work around what needs to be shining at any one moment, and that takes a lot of editorial effort, and it takes a lot of mixing understanding. I think there's certainly no feeling of effects must win or music must win.
There wasn't?
No, not well. I didn't think there was, Ollie.
Well, that's how we do it. It's just all subliminal things where, as if you notice, then it's an issue.
Yeah.
But we are trying to get that all the time.
But clearly, dialogue has to lead,
and music, right?
Clearly,
and music.
Oh, yeah.
But other than that,
And crowd.
effects can have those other moments. Not a problem at all.
Bit of Foley, Paul.
No, we try to really dance around what we collectively feel is important, during the scene in terms of tone and emotion and legibility.
Talk to me about the sound design of the Belmarsh sequence and the return of Blofeld. I love that sequence, and it's very subtle, and there's a lot of there's a lot of quiet happening. But can you talk about kind of how you use the sound design and the effects in that sequence in a way to sort of make that space very foreboding?
You're used to going to MI6 and seeing super slick gadgets and everything, and super futuristic environments, and so it was just something felt quite fresh to go to something that feels very industrial and stark, and I think part of that would have been partly so you feel it's very tucked away and super secure, but also I think it was to sort of underscore that sort of awkwardness between Bond and Madeleine as well, because that's the first time I think they see each other in the film, isn't it? And just that friction there, and I think it was a good backdrop to that, visually and sound wise. Everything's just clunky and awkward and nasty. There's nothing soothing about any of the sound there. So I think that just really was a good underscore for what was happening emotionally on the screen there.
I would love to talk about the sound design on the sort of the World War II abandoned base, which of course every good supervillain has to have a fantastic lair, and so we've got a great one in this sequence. And I presume that entire thing was built on soundstage out of plywood. So acoustically, how did that come to you? And can you talk about sort of building that space from a sound design and mixing it acoustically?
It's great. I mean, I guess there's various locations within that the baddie lair. The big main, the sort of acidic acid farm thing that's there. That with just visually, the very first time you see it with the sort of neon suits and with I think they got gas mask type things on, haven't they? Yeah. And everything. You just go, oh, okay, fine. This, we should do something here. It's not, and so it was just fun. We had, it was the little tannoy noises, the little that came in with the intercom, the sort of PA type things. We just wanted it to sound really dissonant and odd and jar. These people aren't having a good time. They're not happy workers. We wanted it to feel, and it's sort of quirky. Having seen some of Cary's earlier work, he's got, there's a humor there and a quirkiness. And so we were like, fine, I think we're safe to go into some. And so that was a great sequence to work on. We could make it pretty fun. And we deliberately tried to have, because it was an old base, so we had the modern kind of equipment that they were all using, which was either done with Keymers or Eurorack synths and things like that for the modern gadgets. And then at the end, when he then sparks up the old equipment to open up the big doors, we changed the voice from a modern sounding woman speaking Russian to more of a 50s male sounding Russian, and all the equipment then suddenly became, a lot more clunky and everything. So it was quite nice to have the same environment and then sort of two different layers of sound design, one handing over to the other. And you sort of felt the history of the place come back, which was nice.
And it was nice. I mean, that whole island setting had so many different environments for reverb and space and depth for all of us to work in. And walking down the corridor just talking, and then there's gunshots in a corridor or a stairwell, or you're in the big acid farm, or you're out in the middle by the pool,
and the big conversation between Safin and Bond, that one with the crashing waves down below and everything.
And Cary really wanted to press on the waves crashing into the side of that island and the complex all the time when we were out in that open garden area. So, there was it was actually a lot of fun trying to set up those different spaces with whatever we were putting in them, be it gunshots, footsteps, dialogue. It was very rich visually.
It was definitely very intense. The gunfights and the fighting sequence and the gunshots in the stairwell. That was such a contained. Usually these action sequences are playing out in this huge space, but that was so. It was very intimate. The fighting in that sequence. It was great.
And it's again a little bookend, I guess. I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but there's that in Casino Royale. There's the great fight in the stairwell there, which is a lot more rough and ready. I guess that's Bond. He's still becoming the seasoned sort of 008 agent. So, and then obviously he's extremely adept by the end, and everything's much more concise. And so it's quite a nice thing to see the sort of development of what he's like as an agent as well, between those two sequences. And sound-wise, it's stairwell. It's really nice. You can have a very big reverb that doesn't last very long in terms of a big bloom that just disappears quickly. So you can define a space very heavily, and then you're back down to quieter again. So it's a nice change from the other environments, which were much more long haul bloom kind of things. To have something really concise but still well defined was good fun in there. So you'd have big percussive sounds that disappear again very quickly,
especially when those grenades went off.
Yeah.
I don't know how we could hear anything after that.
We didn't for a while, did he?
For sure. I love at the very end, we get that call back to the, iconic Louis Armstrong song, "We Have All the Time in the World." And Paul, I was just curious, how did that come to you? Did you just get was it just a 2-track stereo that came to you, or like, how did you handle this song? What is that song is like from 67, 68, something like that?
Yeah, and obviously iconic, and it was great placement of that song. I thought it was. I've had quite a few people mention that actually. That was just a 2-track, and I'm not going to ask for stems on that, to be honest, because they don't exist. And I just spread it in the room environment, in a 7.1 environment, and let it play. It sounded beautiful. It was. I didn't have to do a great deal to it, to be honest. It's such a classic.
It is really classic. Well, I do want to wrap up. I just I'm going to put you guys all on the spot. I'm curious because I always want to know. Do you have a particular favorite sequence in the film from a sound perspective that when you watch the film, it just kind of makes you all feel kind of giggly inside that you got to work on it, that makes you particularly happy when you watch the film?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it would change day to day, but if I had to think on the spot, and I'd probably change my mind again in 5 minutes. But we call it Donut Square. When the DB5, flips around and the music kicks in and it's everything and it's just pure Bond. That was a goosebump moment, definitely, when we were working on it, for sure. Yeah,
most definitely, and I would agree with that. And also just early on in the film where he's on the motorbike and he's riding up those narrow alleys and he's going up the stairs and he flies over the wall and through the parade of musicians, and then he just dumps the bike and walks into the hotel. That's classic.
You're right. That is a classic Bond moment. I think that my audience, people gasped when he shot up on that motorbike over the precipice and landed. It was a fantastic sequence.
Great sequence.
Mark, what about you? What's your favorite scene?
I would agree. I think the Italy stuff for me was the more iconic Bondy sequences, with help from music, obviously, Paul. But yeah, that would be the one for me.
I mean, there's so many good sequences, to be honest. That's a tough question. Even when they were coming down to the lair at the end, to Rami's island, and they're in that plane, and they're not sure how to fly it, or they say they don't know how to fly it, and they're going to crash. No, they're underwater now. How does that happen?
The sequence in the woods was fun for sound as well, with the ambient kind of diffuse sounds of motorbikes circling, like sharks circling them. There's loads of fun scenes to work on, for sure.
Oliver, I'm glad you pointed out that sequence, the chase in Norway with the Range Rovers. Like that was some amazing car work that was done in that chase sequence. It was really, really satisfying from a sound perspective. So you guys did some amazing work on that sequence.
Thank you. And the stunt work, I mean, was just exceptional as well. These producers they get the most incredible practical stunt work done on their films. It's just, you don't have to wait and wonder what the scene's going to turn out like. It's like, here you go. This is the motorbike jumping that high. This is Land Rovers, that aren't even released yet, flipping over. And, it's, so you just get the footage and, you can work on it straight away. Because we were working on it during filming. So it was great. We didn't have to wait around for, but they had fantastic footage to work on.
Helicopter sweeps and the motorbikes coming down the hill and all of that through the water, camera right next to the water spraying up. Yeah, it's great.
Well, guys, thank you so much, Mark, Oliver, Paul. It was great to talk with you about this film. I'm thrilled that they kept it back and didn't sort of put it out on a streaming platform in the middle of the pandemic. This is really a movie that does need to be experienced in the cinema because it's a big film with a great sounding mix. And congratulations to you guys on it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for interviewing us.
Thanks again to Oliver, Paul, and Mark for taking the time today to talk to us about No Time to Die. It is playing right now in a Dolby Cinema near you, so I hope you get a chance to go out and see it in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. It is a truly spectacular experience. As always, we have links in the show notes to help you find your way to that. Many thanks to our friends at MGM who helped us put this conversation together. Once again, make sure you are subscribed to us, the Dolby Institute podcast. Next up, we have another fun episode with a very big director and friend of the show that you will not want to miss. You can find links to our dedicated podcast feed in the show notes, or you can just search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, thanks again for joining us. This has been Sound and Image Lab, the Dolby Institute podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry. Production support is by Taylor Hines, and our production coordinator is Sunny Chen. Thank you for listening.